I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of country. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Australian Access Federation acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today and those who may be joining us in this meeting. So I'm Keith Brophy, Portfolio Manager here at AAF. Thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Your expertise and input are essential to the work we're doing with the Policy Development Kit. I'd like to introduce the team who will be presenting today. Ayana, our Policy Officer, who's been instrumental in finalising version 1.5. Pranima, our Project Manager, who will share the Guardians project experience. And Andy, our business analyst, who will walk us through the CEIF project application. So with the team in place, this is how today's session will flow. Ayana will start us off with a recap of how the Policy Development Kit has evolved and take us through the key changes in version 1.5, particularly around terminology updates and the documents that have been refreshed. Following this, Pranima and Andy will share those real project use cases, practical applications that demonstrate how the framework supports collaboration, strengthens governance, and integrates with existing community structures. After these presentations, we'll open the floor for questions and discussion before moving to the approval process for version 1.5. We'll also cover some potential developments on the horizon. So some housekeeping items on the first slide. I think we mentioned that this is being recorded, so just to be aware that we're recording this session so that we can share it out later on. If you could keep your microphones muted, as we would ask you to put your questions in through Teams chat or raise it in person when we open up for questions after the presentations. We'll address all those questions then and move to the approval process. When we do get to the approval process, I will share an MS Forms link for you to submit your vote. So if there are no questions at this point, I'll hand over to my colleague Ayana to take us through the new Policy Development Kit.
Thank you so much, Keith. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Ayana, and I am a policy analyst at AAF. So thank you all for joining today's meeting. As shared in the meeting pack circulated earlier and included a detailed overview of the updates to the previous PDK version. So over the next few slides, we'll focus on some of the changes with the understanding that you've had the opportunity to review the pack beforehand. So without further ado, the ultimate idea that we have as a trust and identity framework and policy kit that puts research communities at the center of identity and access management. So instead of making researchers deal with multiple institutional systems, it allows them to use federated identities and manage their own access rule. And at the same time, it's TASE compatible with institutional identity providers and infrastructure services. Next slide, please. That's where the AAF's Trust and Identity Policy Development Kit comes in, and that is a compilation of best practices and recommendations that help research and e-infrastructures to implement a scalable and cost-effective policy and operational frameworks for their authentication and authorization for research collaboration, blueprint architecture compliant, authentication and authorization infrastructures, so they're ARC BPA compliant AAIs. And these documents really has three core capabilities that we want to ensure for the research infrastructures. We've got the operational security, trustworthy membership management, and data protection. So basically, PDK supports research infrastructures in adopting or enhancing a policy set that regulates the operation and use of an authentication and authorization infrastructure in line with the ARC blueprint architecture. The policies are there to provide a starting point or minimum requirements so that research infrastructures do not have to reinvent the wheel. Next slide, please. And that brings us to why we are here today. So we want to seek the approval of AAF's PDK version 1.5 for policies for trust and identity in the context of research collaborations in Australia. Next slide. Before anything else, I just wanted to do a quick overview of the history, how it started. Our goal is simple: to provide a secure, scalable research infrastructure for use so users from different institutions can access shared resources across boundaries. To achieve this, we've adopted the ARC framework, originated in Europe, but now widely recognized as a global trust and identity framework. And why a global framework? Because research is international, as we all know. Using ARC means that we align best practices, ensure interoperability, and build trust. And AAF helped with designing the ARC policy kit, and now we are applying that policy toolkit in the Australian context. Next slide, please. So the blueprint on the right-hand side provides a set of interoperable architectural building blocks for software architects and technical decision makers to design and implement access management solutions for international research collaborations. Today, we will be focusing on the policy element of that landscape or framework, and PDK on the left-hand side offers a structured approach for developing policies related to access, identity management, and trust within a collaborative research environment. Next slide. Cool. So firstly, I wanted to acknowledge the work that Danny, Amber, and Far have done on the PDK to get us to where we are today. Their work has been valuable to get us to where PDK is today. And just a quick brief overview of the key achievements to date. We've mapped out ARC policies against the Australian legislation, so no conflicts were found. And we've got the governance group endorse ARC as trust and identity framework. And then we ran a national campaign and formed a policy working group to review, adapt, and simplify policies for Australian use. So that's where we are today. And thank you guys again for joining the meeting. Next slide. This was presented by Danny at our last PWG meeting as a recap, and since then our governance group has accepted the progress report and is now looking forward to the final report and the endorsement outcome, which now brings us to date. Next slide. So again, acknowledging the fantastic work that Danny, Amber, and Far has done on the PDK. They've tracked changes across policies, created a terminology crosswalk and dictionary, and developed an introduction guide with clear instructions on where to start. Their contributions have been critical in making PDK practical and easy to use. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about the work that we've done to refine PDK. So PDK version 1.5. First, we've updated the terminology to make it consistent and easier to understand. Second, we aligned policies with Australian legislation to ensure compliance, and we linked the PDK policies together to form a governance model, starting with PDK1, so the top-level governance policy. And finally, we've defined new roles for collaborative environment, like the privacy officer and community manager, just to make the responsibilities a bit more clear. Next slide. So the next two slides will show some of the terminology changes across the PDK. So previously, we understand that some of the terms have been confusing, and we understand that this has been a consistent challenge. Next slide, please. So this is where we are now. With your input, we've developed a clearer strategy and updated the language and wording. We've also made definitions consistent across the PDK to improve clarity and usability moving forward. Next slide, please. So let's put it all together. I'm a bit of a visual learner, so I hope that you can follow this. So this kind of visually represents what we've discussed so far. So we recognize that and acknowledge that each infrastructure down below, infrastructure A, infrastructure B, has its own policies and procedures. When institutions decide to form a collaboration like the Guardians or SEEP, they provide shared services that multiple research communities are able to access. And the common goal here is to build a layer of trust so collaboration can work smoothly. And to achieve this, we need a minimum set of standards tailored to the context of each collaboration. And that's where the PDK comes in. It sits at the heart of that collaboration. It is a tool to develop policies that ensure interoperability and consistency across diverse infrastructures, all united by common standards and frameworks. Next slide. So these are just an overview of the set of the policies within the PDK and updates from the last meeting. Next slide, please. And this really highlights the need for structure and language alignment to ensure that it is easily understood and that it reflects the landscape and context within Australia. Next slide. So this brings us to today. This is version 1.5. So some of the key updates to PDK is that we've made sure that the changes that we've made was to strengthen PDK. So this is PDK 1. And first, we reframed PDK 1 as a governance and operational policy, adding clear context and purpose. Second, we introduced strong governance provisions covering management, decision-making, dispute resolution, and regular reviews every 3 years. And we defined new roles like community manager and privacy officer and refined existing roles to ensure clarity and accountability within collaborations. And next slide, please. So some of the key updates to the privacy policy is that we've added, again, introduction, objectives, and scope sections to define the policy as a baseline template for all collaboration service providers and ensure consistency with other policies and legislation. We introduce an implementation section recommending one overarching collaboration-wide privacy policy with flexibility as per service policies. We also aligned a policy with recent upcoming privacy reforms, including the Privacy and Other Legislation Amendment Act 2024 and changes to the Privacy Act 1988 to prepare for future compliance. We really want to ensure that there is alignment to Australian legislation so policies are practical and usable in the Australian context. Next slide, please. So some of the updates for PDK 3 is to hopefully make the policy clearer and more practical. We added introduction, objectives, and scope sections to help service providers understand their obligations and the context of the collaboration. We refined terminology. We included a legislative compliance section to guide alignment with Australian laws. There's also provisions to offer guidance to service providers to declare compliance, appoint a privacy officer, and share audit results. So these are recommended practices to support accountability and good governance. PDK 4, next slide. And for PDK 4, we've made several improvements to the acceptable use policy. First, we introduced clear sections, introduction, purpose, scope, implementation, and definitions to make the policy easier to follow and to show how it fits within the broader collaboration framework. Second, the AUP now applies to all registered users across the collaboration, not just infrastructure users, so coverage is clearer. And finally, we've aligned a policy with Australian legislation and strengthened privacy and accountability by adding contact details and links to related policies while keeping the language simple and user-friendly. Next slide. So PDK 5 updates, we've made some of the improvements to the acceptable authentication assurance policy. It's expanded from a technical document into a governance policy with clear sections like, again, introduction, scope, and implementation, so its role in the federated collaborations is clearer. Second, we've linked it to the top-level collaboration policy, PDK1, and aligned it with international assurance standards such as ARC GO21 and REFEDS-RAF, which are international frameworks and guidelines on exchange assurance and identity assurance, while ensuring that it works within the Australian context. And finally, we've added practical elements like coverage for non-human users, risk-based exceptions, and registry requirements, keeping the policy interoperable with global standards and usable for Australian research collaborations. Next slide, please. Some of the key updates is that we've renamed this policy, PDK06, to Community Membership Management Policy to clearly distinguish operational user administration from collaboration level governance. We've linked to PDK01, PDK2 to 0.5 related security privacy document, certified version 1 framework to embed lifecycle management in a coherent policy suite. We've introduced the sponsor role and clarified responsibilities for the community manager, service provider, and security contact to improve delegation and support distributed management. And we've had detailed stages explicitly outlined in the policy as well, such as registration, attribute assignment, renewal, suspension, termination with procedural logging requirements for accountability. And we've added explicit clauses on personal information handling, user consent, and compliance with the Privacy Act and related Australian legislation. Next slide. Some of the key updates to the Service Operations Security Agreement is that we've renamed from Service Operations Security Policy to Service Operations Security Agreement to reflect its role as a bilateral, multilateral operational agreement within collaborations. So in terms of alignment and scope, we've added objectives and scope, embedded references to PDK1 through to PDK8, and aligned with Certify, Sanctify, and Edugain for global federated trust and interoperability. We've strengthened service provider obligations for governance, incidents response, and privacy compliance, and incorporated Australian legislation as well. PDK8, next slide. Some of the key updates is that we've renamed incident response procedure to security incident response procedure and broadened the scope to include collaboration, service providers, community, and users. We've also done a bit of global alignment and references by adding context, objectives, and scope, align, certify, interfederation obligations like Edugain in common, and link to PDK1, PDK6, and PDK7 for policy coherence. We've also added roles and communication protocols by introducing new terms and roles like security contact, security incidents response coordinator, and traffic light protocol to clarify responsibilities and ensure standardized communication. And lastly, next slide. Lastly, for PDK9, which is the risk assessment, there's now a link to the Australian Government Office of the Australian Information Commissioner Privacy Impact Assessment, which has been added to the document. Next slide. Which now brings us to PDK in real life. So we will now move on to user case scenario, or where we see PDK in action, where PDK has been used to develop policies for federated access. So now I will hand it over to my colleague Andy to talk about SEEF.
Thanks, Ayana. My name is Andy Nguyen. I work as a business analyst here at AAF. I was involved with the SEEF project and really looking at how PDK could be really put into a SEEF environment. So SEEF really is looking at a collective effort between research, government, and industry to share environmental data. It's really important as such that we establish that trust between the partners and the collaboration, enable that trust and data supply chain so those end products can be used in research and decision making, and enable that data sharing between all three of those important parties, research, government, and industries. And to do that, we really looked at PDK as a whole. So the whole suite, we looked at how we could apply that work into an Australian context, knowing full well of the legal and legislation requirements required. So we looked at how that would be done and had a series of workshops where we worked through each of those PDKs to kind of go through each individual one and their impact on the SEEK project. Out of that, we noticed a couple of risks that I would like to share with you guys. One was data sensitivity, so making sure that the PDKs referenced data sensitivity, or at least had some mention of data sensitivity and how important it is that that data doesn't get out of hand, that data is used in the agreed manner in that collaboration. Access issues, so between the government, research, and industry, really making sure who gets access to each piece of data. It was really flagged. And finally, organizational maturity. Working in such a wide breadth of organizations, we've noticed some people needed a bit more assistance in understanding what the PDK was trying to do, and really getting that maturity across the whole organizations, and finding resources that we could talk to about the PDK in general. So yeah, as I said, we've tried to apply the full suite, and we've made references to the 5 safes. So it's important to note that the PDK can exist with other frameworks that are already in place in the Australian context. So the 5 safes, fair and care principles, really making sure that that alignment was still there and that they could work together to provide a well-rounded PDK policy for collaboration. As I said, to do that, we did a bit of a gap analysis between the current policy and the PDK. Those several workshops to inform the design of the policy, and out of it, we developed some actions required for each of those organizations to conform to that PDK or that updated PDK. I'll pass it on to Ayana now to talk about Cadre.
So with the Cadre project, we wanted to establish a shared and distributed service data access management platform for the social sciences and related disciplines. And I guess for the why are we doing this project? It is to improve transparency and efficiency of data access requests. So that was the key driver. And before, it was all done by email. So neither the applicant nor the data access committee members knew where things were in the process. And Cadre resolves that and provides data access committee members with what amounts to a precedent database so they can review similar previous requests to help make a decision about access. And again, we've identified a couple of risks, data breaches, unauthorized access, and because the project is included multiple organizations that have different policies, procedures, and frameworks within their own organizations, then there were operational risks when it comes to interoperability. And the policies that have been used were PDKs 1 through to PDK 6, as well as the 5 safes framework. And this really highlights the use of PDK to form a minimum set of standards tailored to the context of each collaboration. And in this case, that was the Cadre project. And in terms of the implementation strategies, there are gap analysis workshops to understand purpose, scope, risk, which then informed policy decisions and policy designs. We then tested the policies mentioned and training and capacity building to ensure that the project and policies will continue to improve. And now I hand it over to my colleague Purnima to talk about the Guardians project.
Thanks, Ayana. Good afternoon, everyone. As some of you might know, and most of you might have not heard about Guardians, the vision of the Guardians is actually to develop a world-class digital infrastructure to support secure, responsible, and collaborative use of human genomes data. So pretty much the essential foundation for this program of work includes trust and identity governance and the sustainable data sharing to ensure that research using these genome data is safe, standard aligned, and also globally connected. As you can see from this slide, this is the collaboration partners that we've got for Guardians. We've got 8 collaboration partners, and that includes Biocommons, Garvin, University of Sydney, QIMRB, University of Melbourne, along with Peter Mac. We've got Children Cancer Institute and NCI as well. So it spans about 19 services in this particular program of work, I would say. Next slide, please. So we've had several discovery workshops with each of the individual partners, considering there are so many services that's coming on board as part of the Guardians itself. There were a couple of challenges or few challenges that we identified during the discovery workshops that included specifically focusing on policy would be before or alongside building the tech, we need a clear rules in place of who can access, what data can they access, under what condition they can access, how identities are verified, and how data is shared, etc., to ensure consistency is brought amongst all of these services. But we now have a technical architecture in place that is already existing, for which a comprehensive policy framework needs to be established, which means it could involve moving some blocks around, hopefully not, but to adopt these policies. This is especially important in collaboration like Guardians, where multiple organizations and institutions are involved and need to trust and align with the same policies. The next challenge that we identified was the varying level of service maturity across the partners, because they were some were really well-established systems to be an emerging platform. So these did present challenges in securing consistent buy-ins for policy adoption itself. The third challenge was as I already mentioned, the collaboration spans multiple services, which means each of these services have different types of data with varying sensitivity levels as well, requiring tailored policy consideration for those services, and also to be bought below the Guardians umbrella, collaboration umbrella itself. The other challenge that we encountered was, even though the data sensitivity between these services are similar for certain services, the partner institution may require distinct governance model to be compliant with their own internal organization or even future funding body policies. So just to mitigate these risks, the plan of action that we've got at the moment is to have a collaborative workshop with the partners to surface these policy challenges, area of alignment, and define minimum viable policy requirements in first place before drafting a policy baseline policy suite itself. Then to perform a gap analysis against the PDK and the partner institutional policy or any of the information that we've gathered during these workshops to guide the Guardian services to assess the compatibility. The next is to develop a value proposition, taking into the risks, taking into the account of the risks that might emerge through this process, and also provide a risk mitigation as a targeted recommendation to address these policy discrepancies, and also to seek a strategic direction or leadership from Biocommons leadership team where necessary to gain these buy-ins, or even to have discussion around how these policies could be well adopted within the Guardians collaboration. Having said that, I will hand over to Ayana to pretty much walk you through any of the lessons learned from all of these projects in place.
Thank you, Purnima. So now we'll spend a little bit of time talking about lessons learned through applying PDK in some of the projects that me and my colleagues have just outlined. So in terms of the lessons learned, we understand and that the implementation of the policy pack requires dedicated resources. We are understanding the common goal and the purpose of the project to create policy specific to the protecting the project's assets is really key. It's really important. And that PDK, using the PDK actually helps research collaborations to clarify their purpose. When there is a clear purpose for the collaboration, clear scope of its users and operations, it actually enables people to get clear about what they are trying to do and who they are doing it for. The collaboration governance model and operations should be in place in order to not only identify the policy requirements, but to also allow the implementation of these policies. A clear risk assessment is required and is really important to inform policy decisions and requirements. And this has been previously mentioned before. The worst time to develop a cybersecurity response process is in the middle of a cybersecurity incident. Research collaboration magnifies the complexity because there is a risk of compromise to multiple organizations. Incidents require a coordinated response. This is hard enough to do properly inside an organization, let alone coordinating across potentially dozens of organizations and sites across the country. It is really, really important to have all partners within the collaboration to be on board with the policy kit and the agreements. And it is also important to have a sponsor or someone in an organization or institution to take up that leadership role in the collaboration. That is the key to getting resources. A reflection from Cadre was that things were moving along quite well when Cadre Project had a sponsor in place that was championing the policy work, and the project did stall a little bit when that person left. And just reiterating the last point on why it is important for a project or collaboration to have a sponsor, because the usual reaction to policy by research and IT people, and just in general the industry when it comes to regulations and frameworks, is the next slide. But policy shouldn't be scary. It shouldn't be intimidating. PDK is a really useful tool to provide a collaborative or a co-design approach to designing fit-for-purpose policies within the context of a project or collaboration. And with that, I will now hand it over back to my colleague Keith for the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Ayana, Andy, and Purnima. What we've seen today represents a significant uplift in what the PDK delivers, that clearer terminology, where there's new roles and responsibilities that strengthen collaboration across organisations, the international best practice grounded in the Australian context, and that future-focused work where we're incorporating AI-assisted work and embedding FAIR principles throughout. And perhaps most importantly, that call to action, policy development before implementation, not as an afterthought. So before we move to the approval process, I thought we could address any questions or points of clarification, and this is your opportunity to discuss that content before you cast your approval vote. I can see in the chat that there was a mention about feeding this work back into the community, the international community, and the team is working with ARC on that. And Andrew, did you want to raise a point?
Yep, sure. Sorry, just in general, would you prefer questions in chat or people speaking?
In person, in chat, now's the time to raise it. Thank you.
So thinking about this from an international perspective, you've just referenced that. I don't see any reference in the meeting pack, the current policy toolkit, to GDPR. And we know that there are lots of Australian researchers collaborating with European colleagues where GDPR compliance is a requirement. I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Ayana, did you want to comment on that, or?
The European set of frameworks and standards. I guess that's one thing that we could note in terms of considerations and making sure that it is implemented in the policy suite.
Yeah, I would strongly encourage you to do that. For instance, ARDC has just run an international conference working with international colleagues, and it was a requirement that what we did with the data collected as part of that conference had to comply with GDPR.
GDPR, yeah.
General Data Protection Regulations. I have a follow-up unrelated question, Keith. Do you want me to give other people a go and then come back?
I don't see any other hands, so yeah, please share.
So I note that you refer to the alignment of the policy toolkit with 5 Safes, Care and Fair. I have many questions about that, but let me start off with a relatively straightforward one. What does that alignment look like? And how would it work if there was a conflict between the toolkit and, say, 5 Safes or Care?
Yeah, that's a good question, Andrew. So the PDK was really developed to offer a baseline. So where they were lacking maybe in fair and care principles, it would then take precedence that the fair and care principles would build into the PDK. So where it would be missing or where there would be conflicts, we would reference back to those more developed frameworks like the fair and care principles.
Mm-hmm. And I guess just adding on to that, Andrew, is like when we first start a project in the design or discoveration phase, we will then look at the scope of the project, the purpose of the project, and then the PDK is just a tool that is used to design the minimum set of requirements. And as Andy was mentioning, if it's appropriate and fit for purpose for the project, that we need to consider other legislation, let's say GDPR or any legislation within the Australian context, then that's where we would design a full suite, just as a that would form within the context of that collaboration and project.
Oh, okay. And so just to be clear, so that would then be a specific instance of the policy toolkit to meet the requirements of that particular project setting.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Are there any other questions at this point? Peter.
Yes, I apologise, I'm a bit late in this process, but I did have a couple of questions and they might be a little naive, so I apologise for that in advance. But where does it say you can tailor it? I mean, when a collaboration, I'm thinking about given a set of collaborators want to adhere and sign off on the PDK collectively, and you go through a tailoring process, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And so you can drop elements of the PDK by the look of it?
Yes, so as you saw with Cadre, we used 1 to 6, we didn't use the full suite, so yeah.
So is it actually written in that you can tailor it?
I believe in PDK 1, we mentioned the modularity of it. Yes, so and I will take that on board, Peter, that modularity needs to be more expressed. It is designed to be modular, so you would take pieces of the PDK as you would need them.
Also, you mentioned gap analysis against the PDK. Is that done from a self-assessment perspective? Is there a framework for a collaborator to make a self-assessment?
I guess how I would answer that is that when we look at the project, we'll see what kind of gaps, what are the risks that the project and the assets of the project require. And at the same time, if you're specifically talking about the policy itself, we are in touch with the colleagues internationally, so the ARC. So if there are any, let's say, any reviews or any changes that is made internationally, we do make sure that we are informed and that we are part of that co-design, so that, let's say, we make sure that the policy kit is future-proof and that it is currently evolving if there are any gaps. So, like, say, if there are any, I think in one of the policies it's mentioned that there is now a provision for non-human users. So that is an evolution, of course. Now that we've got AI and there is an evolution in that technology, we do make sure that we are aware of that is considered, so that all of the policy or the PDK is used, or the PDK is in a position that it is future-proofed and is currently and continuously improving.
Sure. Thank you. I've got one last question. It's a pretty scary framework, but I presume that, and it's well crafted, but a collaboration can vary the rules, correct? So if a collaboration, let's just say there's a bunch of services, you spoke earlier that there are a bunch of services that are more or less mature, and an institution knows that they're not compliant. This gets back to the self-assessment. is there an opportunity for a collaboration to say, okay, we understand you're not compliant today, but you're working towards, but we'll accept your service and your sign off and be part of the collaboration, even though that on a risk-based assessment, and that you will work towards being more compliant in the future with reviews. I mean, is that the way the policy is meant to work, or is it more strict?
It's not as strict. So the exercise, if we were to backtrack a little, the exercise that we would do first is what are the policies, procedures and frameworks and standards in place within each of the organisations to see whether there are any overlaps or common theme. And then from that, that's when we understand that, and when we understand the purpose and scope of the project, then we would then make or design a policy suite that would form a baseline. So minimum requirements for a collaboration. And again, when you talk about tenure of the project, it could mature or go beyond the timeline of the project, but we make sure that the kit itself is in a position that is flexible to ensure that the minimum requirements are being met. And basically, we're just trying to protect the assets of the collaboration. So it's more of a prevention, but we also put things in place so that if there is an incident was to occur, we've got frameworks that are in place.
Sure, thank you.
Diana, correct me if I'm wrong. Just from the top level collaboration policy, the first document in the PDK would kind of confirm what is the minimum viable requirements for a partner to be within the collaboration, and the partner will need to meet that minimum viable standards to be a part of collaboration. And then we could have flexibility within the policies where we say you are currently at step 2, but you need to do another 2 steps to be compliant or to be adopted to the policy that forms the collaboration itself. So all I guess those level of details will be defined in the top level collaboration policy anyway.
Yeah. And it provides us a starting point, like just echoing what Patrick said in the chat. The PDK is used as a starting point because there might already be baseline policies within a lot of the organizations that have formed the collaboration. So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel. We're going to use PDK as a starting point to see if there are any overlap, and then if there are any gaps and risks that may not be covered by each of the institution, but is very relevant to the collaboration, to the project itself, then we would make sure to fill those gaps.
Thank you. Dean, do you have a question?
Oh, yeah, more clarification. I've been, it's a lot of information. I've been trying to follow along as best I can. So I was really interested in the cybersecurity response and the classifications of sensitive data. I've actually had a look, and you've got quite a decent classification there. But was it the intent? And with what you just mentioned, where people would have already policies or groups would have policies in place, was it the intent that you would have an overarching person coordinating between different security teams at each location? That was the actual intent of that. So you'd bring in a sponsor, as in a person who actually is a central source to coordinate multiple teams in order to get that cyber response in action, because like you said, it needs to be done swiftly, and it's a plan before, not during. How can you give me just a little bit of an idea of how you see that working?
I guess so we're going to use the kit. So, but I in the chat it says it's not the policy itself, because we are basically doing the design fit for purpose for whatever project or collaboration we are dealing with. And essentially, we're just basically forming a governance structure to ensure interoperability between different institutions that are part of that project. I guess that kind of eliminates the risk of operational risk and confusion. And so they've got that set of baseline requirements as a starting point for when an incident was to happen. Yeah, so it's just used as a kit, and we recognize and acknowledge and appreciate that each organization already have their set of policies. And as my colleagues have mentioned, some organizations have a different level of maturity when it comes to their own organizational policies, and some organizations that are part of the collaboration may not have that, and so that's why we use the toolkit as a that will form a template, or would form the baseline as a starting point to draft up or inform policy decisions and policy design.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. And back to you, Peter.
Yeah, great. So in terms of establishing within a collaboration that all the collaborators are adhering to the policy to some degree, risk assessment. This framework, this governance framework, sets up for multiple collaborations, and that's correct. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of research going on, different sensitivities of data. In the NIF instance, there's clinical data flying around, there's research data identifications, but have the situation where there will be multiple collaborations, but the same institutions, possibly with the same or different services within those collaborations. So is the assessment and the policy framework applied at the collaboration level? So somebody like University of Sydney or any one of NIF partners, for example, might have to go through this process multiple times. Is that correct? Or is there a way, how do you streamline that? That sounds like it's not going to be efficient.
I guess that's one of the things that, from a policy perspective, I would work closely with the project manager and different SMEs, if there is one, within other organisations when we are tackling, let's say, for the Guardians project, because we do understand that there are different levels of policy maturity. The PDK should just be, it would provide I'm trying to phrase it would add value in terms of using it to assist and support that design process. And in terms of making sure that that process is as efficient, then we will make sure that we make that we have consideration and assessment as each step goes through, that we do engage with our stakeholders quite frequently and quite regularly to ensure that, if the policy suite is working and that it is clear.
Yeah, look, where I was coming from was, and as I'm making this up as I go along, is there a sort of a baseline assessment made for an institution which has its own policies against the framework that says, yes, we're generally compliant in all these areas, and then any collaboration that they have, any collaboration that they participate in, especially international ones, can be assured that that we only have to worry about the bits around the edges for a particular collaboration. Like their data security, the privacy policies might be unique and specialised for when the European community is involved, as opposed to within the Australian context only, which might be, the Australian privacy legislation applies only. And that might be a separate assessment for an institution. Do you follow where I'm coming from? How do you make this streamlined so that you're not reinventing the wheel? And I know I just made that point, and I heard what you said, but it sounds to me like it's burdensome, because I'm thinking about how do you get the institutions to adopt, to participate, and say this is just too hard.
I guess I guess before that gets played out, making sure that we have a clear understanding of the scope of the project, because I think understanding the scope and understanding the purpose would kind of bring you back to the goal of the project. And if, let's say, there isn't, if let's say some of the organizations think, oh, this is too much to follow, moving along, and then we can kind of start asking questions to why that is, just having a conversation with them to where the pain points are and understanding that to make sure that it is still considered. Like, we're not trying to put a policy suite. We're trying to, let's say, we're trying to design a policy suite that would form minimum requirements, but ensuring that it is future-proof and that it's continuously improving. That is where the level of engagement really happens, is that working within the project to see if the policies that are being tested are still feasible. And if it is not, we want to understand where the pain points are. And we also have started to engage with relevant organizations that may have that legal background in terms of the federal government, like ELSI and things like that. So we are in touch. We are continuously engaging, so we can ensure that we are providing advice and designing fit for purpose policies.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah. But I think it's important that the kit is a starting point to help you see what you need to do and what existing policies might need to come together and how those collaborations might work. It may not streamline all the intricacies of those collaborations and those conversations. That might be a bit beyond the PDK, but the PDK gives you the basis to start those discussions, and it highlights where some of those gaps might be. Margie.
This has been fabulous. Thank you, Andrew and Peter, and others for raising these comments and sharing your views of the policy kit. I think there are some takeaways here, whether we can resolve them straight away today. But what I'm hearing clearly is that you're seeking something that is streamlined. That there's an opportunity for us to perhaps make clearer that this is an opportunity to select the policies that work best for that given situation, that, it's not necessarily you have to pick up the whole kit and apply it. So I think they're important takeaways for us. So I just want to let you know that I'm certainly, I've heard, this is what I'm hearing from you. I hope that's a correct reflection of some of the points that you've made. There's an opportunity for us to look at, can we make more explicit references to some of the international policies and regulations such as GDPR and so forth. So thank you for those insights. They've been extremely valuable. I think we can go back and look at, because this is going to be iterative development. This is not going to be one and done today. And, the policy will need, the kit will need to evolve. So thank you. I just want to say thank you. Great insights.
Yes, thank you. Echo that sentiment. Dilara, did you have a question or to share?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you again for everyone for that presentation and for all the work you've put in as well. This might be a bit of a simple question. I really hope it wasn't covered before and I've just missed it. But I suppose when you're introducing this with collaborators, how early on, well, I imagine the earliest would be best, but how would you go about that? Is it just simply discussed and agreed upon in writing? Is it something that should be annexed to a contract? I suppose, just how do we go about that confirmation? But maybe that's one for the future. I realize we're running out of time.
I guess it would be nice to have a binding contract right at the start. But if not, at least have that, I guess, in writing, the top level collaboration policy, really explicitly and making it sure it's clear so that moving forward there is something that we could go back to. So that's how we would do it, yeah. And again, reiterating the fact that continually engaging with our stakeholders is really important, because we want to make sure that this is not one and done, as Margie is saying. We want to make sure it's flexible and it's fit for purpose, and that it is evolving to continually improve, and making sure that it is still within the context of that specific collaboration and project that we are working with.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions at this point? Okay, as Margie says, thank you very much for that input. I think in response to those comments, maybe might change the flow a little bit. I've taken note of that international connection with GDPR, the highlighting that the kit is modular, and that different policies can be applied as needed, and maybe some consideration around that self-assessment. So I'm thinking there are potential amendments that we could fit into this version. And what I suggest, unless there are any other points, that we, the team takes a look at those points, integrates them where appropriate, and we reshare the kit and get that approval at that point. But beyond those points, can I take it that otherwise we would approve version 1.5? Nigel?
It's a big kit. We received it 2 days ago. I'm going to need more than 2 days to review it. And on that, how will I tell what's been updated between the old kit and this new kit? I know there's sort of documentation around what's changed, but if I went and reviewed a particular document within it, how would I know what has changed?
We will share this presentation and the slide deck, and I think that includes some of the high-level pieces, but do we have anything further on that, Ayana?
In the meeting pack that you received, there is a table, but also the current version, I believe, is still published online. And let me just check with the meeting pack.
I believe there's highlighted sections are the ones that are the updates. Sorry for speaking over you, Ayana, but yes, the highlighted sections within the policies themselves are the updates.
Thank you, Sarah. I suspected that. I noticed there were yellow highlights in there, but that's useful. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, I think considering those 3 points, we'll look to integrate them into the pack, potentially give people a bit more time to review it, and we'll contact the attendees of this meeting just to finalize that approval. And then we should have our version 1.5. But again, thank you all for your comments and input there. That was really helpful. So looking ahead to the end of the year and into 2026, once we have that version 1.5 approved, we'll publish it online and make it accessible to the broader community. I want to extend an invitation to all of you to road test the PDK 1.5 in your own collaborations. Let us know of your experiences, questions, and feedback. Your insights from real-world application are invaluable in developing it further. As active participants in the ARC3 project, AAF will continue to provide feedback from the Australian community back into the international policy development process. I realise we're at time, so this might be included in our email and circulation of the revised PDK. But looking ahead into 2026, we wanted to see what people thought about maybe converting this group into a community of practice to give us greater flexibility, engagement opportunities, and then also consider the meeting frequency for 2026. I think we're looking to establish a more frequent cadence next year. But as I say, I think we will touch base on this again in the new year, given that we have just gone over time. But again, thank you all for your inputs, and I appreciate your time today. And I think we will wrap it up there.